Continuing on, going through our top redraft rankings. Today, we're tackling the quarterback position, going through our top 24 redraft best ball. If you guys are competitive Dynasty teams, you'll probably get some value from this as well. Quarterback rankings, going through the tiers and kind of where we would select these players. What is their range of outcomes? Who has the high ceilings? Who are the floor plays? All that stuff will be covered in today's video. And of course, if you want to take this advice right into action, Underdog Fantasy has some great contests going live right now. Best Ball Mania 5, of course, $15 million in total prizes. They also have the Pomeranian live right now. $3 entry, $20K to first place. So if you guys are interested in any of those contests, head on over there. Use the promo code FSE to get a $250 bonus bet match back, and then also a special pick'em entry. So, Danny, let's not waste any time. Let's start with the elite quarterbacks. Last year, there was 3 of them. It was Allen, it was Hurts, and Mahomes. And of course, this year, we had Lamar Jackson win the MVP. He joins that tier for these top guys. I'm sure you have Josh Allen, as will most people, be quarterback 1. I actually have Jalen Hurts quarterback 1, but him and Allen would be like neck and neck for me. I'll quickly make the argument for Hurts, and then I'll let you talk about Allen here. The reason I have Hurts quarterback 1 over Josh Allen is mainly because like one offense got a major addition, in my opinion. Saquon's going to give that element of a threatening running game for the Philadelphia Eagles. A.J. Brown's still there. Devontae Smith is still there. Dallas Goedert's still there. Of course, we know what Jalen Hurts brings with his legs, especially on the goal line. And that's kind of why I'm really excited about Jalen Hurts. He also had 10 games last year of the 16 that he played, over 24 fantasy points. So we're talking about a very consistent, very solid ceiling right there, whereas Josh Allen only had 6 such games. So the booms are bigger with Josh Allen. He had more games. He had 3 games of over 30 fantasy points, but the games of, consistent 20 to 25 type of fantasy production, I liked Jalen Hurts a little bit more for that reason. Both of these guys, you can't really go wrong. If you're in the early to mid 3rd round, I feel really good about getting them. Say you started your draft, Tyreek Hill, Josh Jacobs, and then you want to swing back around and grab Jalen Hurts. To me, I don't think you could really go wrong with a start like that.
Yeah, and I'll make the case for Allen. Obviously, not going to argue Jalen Hurts. I mean, he's literally quarterback 2 for me in my rankings at this current point. Clearly a big advantage if you do have Jalen Hurts on your, best ball teams, on your managed league lineups. The reason why I keep coming back to Josh Allen, quarterback 1, and I understand there's a big caveat here. He does lose Stephon Diggs. But at the same time, these are both quarterbacks that if they play the full 17, we can bank on 10 plus touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 15 rushing touchdowns last year. Josh Allen, 15 rushing touchdowns last year. A lot of autonomy once they get inside the 5. I mean, Josh Allen being the 6'5", 250-pound bulldozer. Jalen Hurts obviously having that tush-push, getting 7, 8 touchdowns per year on that 1-yard line. But the difference for me is that with Josh Allen, I've seen him be able to get over 30, 35 passing touchdowns. And I understand that the weapons group is as worse as we've ever seen for Josh Allen since they acquired Stephon Diggs, but that's banking on Dalton Kincaid potentially taking a step, Keon Coleman potentially being an early contributor, maybe Curtis Samuel being able to stretch the field. I trust the talent of Josh Allen. I think he's the quarterback 2 from a real life perspective in the league to be able to make up for the deficiencies in his skill weapons group. He gives you that rushing floor. And like I said, if there's one quarterback that can have a Mahomes 2022 year where the weapons group doesn't look great, but the quarterback pushes them above the bar, I think it's Josh Allen.
So the Mahomes 2022 year, you're referring to not last year, but the year before, obviously. And Mahomes was 25 points per game in that season. I think the only thing I would push back on is that we're going to need a nuclear season out of Dalton Kincaid for that to happen.
Oh,
because
100%.
While Mahomes didn't have the receiver talent around him like that in 2022, Kelsey had a monster season. So for me, I look at this offense, and yes, I think Josh Allen can elevate the play of Keon Coleman, of Curtis Samuel, of Dalton Kincaid, of Khalil Shakir, of all those dudes. But he also lost Gabe Davis too, which is a good spike week, big touchdown every couple games. That's what Gabe Davis did. I just think that Josh Allen is going to have a slightly lower ceiling than he normally does. Is he still going to be a 20-point per game quarterback? Does he still have 23, 24 points per game in his range of outcomes? 24 is what he posted last year, for sure. I just don't think the 25, 26 point per game ceiling is quite there unless we see a big season out of Keon Coleman, unless we see a big season out of one of these ancillary weapons. And for me, knowing that everything to me is going to be firing on all cylinders in Philadelphia based on the weapons group that they have, the way that Saquon and Jalen Hurts in the backfield is going to put defenses in a bind. That's why I prefer Jalen Hurts. It's just a matter of when you got 2 elite guys across the board, both huge rushing floors, huge rushing ceilings, just give me the guy with the better weapons group.
I'm a little bit more concerned about the construct of the offense in Philadelphia. Again, people might say, oh, yeah, you got the Cowboys jerseys up. I understand you're going to reference that. However, we can both objectively agree that Jalen Hurts did not look the same compared to when he had Shane Steichen as his OC 2 years ago. And people are so optimistic on Kellen Moore coming in. I've seen Kellen Moore firsthand. Yes, Dak Prescott led a number one offense when Kellen Moore was here. Dak Prescott has led a number one offense with 3 different offense coordinators. When it comes down to it with Kellen Moore, I really struggle with his ability to adapt against good defenses. And I don't necessarily know how the Eagles are going to be able to handle those type of assignments with Kellen Moore as their OC. Again, not discriminating Jalen Hurts. He's still my quarterback too. I still think he's a stud, but I think there's a little bit more concerns I have for the Eagles offense than I do even for the Bills, simply because I believe in Joe Brady, simply because I believe in Josh Allen.
So my counter argument to that would be, with all that stuff going wrong last year, Hurts was a little banged up. Offense wasn't really performing at the highest level. He still was 10 games of over 24 PPR points, which was better than Josh Allen. So for me, if it stays the same, he was still more consistent, still super high ceiling and all that kind of stuff. We can move off of these two guys, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes.
Hey,
Lamar Jackson.
One
absolutely.
Thing,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, for what it's worth, you can argue Hurts, you can argue Allen. At the end of the day, if these guys are available in the 3rd round, they're absolutely worth the needle moving draft capital you have to spend on them. They are the top of the position. And to be honest, you could even argue that there's a slight mini tier after these two Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, based off the point equity we can expect this upcoming season.
Yeah, with Lamar, I mean, you're talking about a guy last year who won the MVP. He only had 21 points per game for a guy that won the MVP and had, he's never been the type of guy to score like 15 rushing touchdowns, his career high. I mean, he had 5 last year. He had 7 his 2nd and 3rd season in the NFL. He doesn't have the autonomy on the goal line like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts do. The Ravens brought in Derrick Henry. That's going to even get less potentially on the goal line, more so than, losing a guy like Gus Edwards. So for me, that's the difference between a Jalen Hurts and a Lamar Jackson. Is Lamar Jackson probably a better real life quarterback than Jalen Hurts? Probably. Yeah. But the weapons group is worse, and he doesn't have quite as much rushing touchdown upside. So that's the difference between those two guys. He also is definitely a lot less consistent week over week than what Jalen Hurts can provide with his legs. And it's mainly because of those rushing touchdowns and that kind of thing. So that's the difference between Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. I have Jalen Hurts ranked right at that 2-3 turn. If you wanted to start a draft with like CeeDee Lamb, Josh Jacobs, Jalen Hurts, I think that's a great way to start off a draft. Whereas Lamar Jackson, I think I would want to get closer to the back half of the 3rd round, where maybe you can pair him with his tight end, Mark Andrews, or his number 1 receiver, Zay Flowers, in the 4th round or something like that. And then with Patrick Mahomes, I actually have Mahomes ahead of Lamar. So you have Lamar, I'm assuming QB3. I actually have Mahomes ahead of Lamar. And the reason for that is back in 2022, like we said, Mahomes had a 25 point per game season with really only Travis Kelce as his main weapon in that offense. They bring in Xavier Worthy. They bring in Marquise Brown. Rashee Rice, assuming he doesn't get suspended for like the whole year, is a capable pass catcher there. I think all of those guys help Travis Kelce as well, because those field stretchers are going to open up the middle of the field. I think Isaiah Pacheco could have a great season this year. So for me, the Chiefs offense had a mini reset last year where they were still just, winning about defense, and Mahomes had his worst season from a fantasy perspective at 18 points per game. He was QB 10. I think this year that kind of corrects itself. We all know Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, and this year he's going to have a lot better pass catchers to work with.
You mentioned I have Lamar 3, 4. I actually agree with you. I have Mahomes number 3. I have Lamar number 4. Basically for the reasons like you said. Probably should have said something earlier, but all jokes aside, I mean, with Patrick Mahomes, I mean, we saw from a regular season standpoint, I'm not arguing his playoff weeks. He was dominant in the NFL playoffs, especially on that Super Bowl run. But you can make the case, especially from a statistical standpoint, that 2023 was his worst season as a professional quarterback. And the fantasy numbers would speak to that. This is a guy who's finished in the top 5 of quarterbacks in 4 of his 6 separate seasons starting in the NFL. Last year was his downside as the quarterback, 8 overall finish. I believe he was a little bit under that as well in terms of points per game. Like you said, though, they add Xavier Worthy in the draft. They add Marquise Brown in free agency. Rashee Rice, yes, losing him, if they do lose him, probably gets him down to number 4 for me, I would say. But if Rashee Rice only misses like 2 games or 4 games, I'm more than comfortable banking on the Patrick Mahomes resurrection type of season from fantasy. 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions last year, 41 touchdowns, 12 interceptions the year prior when he had arguably a worse weapons group. So I really just believe in the talent. This is the best quarterback in the league, and I believe he can get back up to that at least 35 plus passing touchdown range, possibly even crack 40 again this year.
Yeah, on a per game basis, lowest passing yards per game, lowest yards per attempt, He didn't score a rushing touchdown, which he scored
Yeah.
4, 2, 2, and 2 like every other season before. So he didn't score a rushing touchdown last year either, which is kind of an anomaly for him. Only 27 passing touchdowns. The only other time he did that was 2019 when he only played 14 games. So, I mean, 18.4 fantasy points per game. We're talking like Brock Purdy, like Tua Tagovailoa type of numbers last year on a per game basis. He was kind of a liability if you drafted him in like the third round or the second round potentially in fantasy drafts last year. Again, the weapons group, I was a little lower on Patrick Mahomes last year. I thought the weapons group was going to come back to bite him a little bit. This year, I feel pretty confident that in the 40s or in the late 30s where you're getting him in underdog drafts, and in home leagues, you still probably can get him in like the late third round area potentially. I feel pretty confident he's going to have a bounce back season. Again, when I just think about it, common sense, rational brain thinking, Worthy, Marquise Brown to stretch the field, Travis Kelce to work the middle of the field, Pacheco to keep the offense moving, Rashee Rice when he comes back, whenever that is, to catch the slant patterns and the in breakers and that kind of stuff. This offense could move a lot better this year than they did last year.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And these are the clear top 4 quarterbacks. These are the guys that you will be drafting high in your drafts to be needle movers at the position. However, if you miss out on these 4 guys, I would argue that this tier of guys in the mid range all have their cases to be elite fantasy scorers. And we'll start it off with CJ Stroud, the offensive rookie of the year this past season for the Houston Texans. He comes into the year with no expectations, obviously leads them to the divisional round of the playoffs. You can argue he's already one of the tier 2 quarterbacks in the NFL. And now he adds Stephon Diggs. Now, do I think Stephon Diggs is the same player? If you guys watched the wide receiver episode, do I think Stephon Diggs is the same player like he was in his prime? A 97th, 96th, 97th percentile separator in his prime 2 years ago? No. But can he be that ancillary number 2 weapon to be able to stretch the defense vertically, give you that underneath weapon, provide the valuable touches in this offense while Nico Collins takes away that boundary X wide receiver role? Absolutely. I really do feel like at this point in his career, is Stephon Diggs a true ultimate number 1 wide receiver? Not necessarily, but when you have Nico Collins, when you have Tank Dell, I think Stephon Diggs can go absolutely explosive in this offense. So for CJ Stroud, you mentioned this with the Houston wide receivers yesterday. Sometimes you just don't want the pancake. Sometimes you just want to get the syrup that covers it all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I look at CJ Stroud, he might have the best weapons group in totality. Cause I think you argue number 1 receiver versus like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, for example, what Jalen Hurts is dealing with, or T Higgins and Jamar Chase, what Joe Burrow is dealing with. But in totality, like if they suffered an injury or two for a couple of games, they have Nico, they have Tank Dell, they have Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz is a capable tight end. Joe Mixon's probably going to keep the backfield moving in terms of the offense. So yeah, I feel really good about CJ Stroud as like a 4th, 5th round type of quarterback if you miss out on these top guys. For me, I am really prioritizing Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes in my drafts because I feel like you've never been able to get 25 plus point per game scores in the 3rd round. Usually they're 2nd round type of picks. So for me, I've been really prioritizing those guys, not getting as much CJ Stroud in best ball drafts, but I still like him. I still think he's a solid option. It's just that his price tag is pretty high in best ball. In redraft leagues and home leagues, maybe he's available a little bit later, but because of stacking purposes, his price point has gotten a little bit higher than I would like it to be in terms of underdog drafts. Joe Burrow, to me, is the same type of case. I mean, you got Jamar Chase, you got T Higgins there. None of these guys, it's been so unlucky for the Cincinnati Bengals. Last year, we saw, like, I wanted to see an explosive eruption from this Jamar Chase, T Higgins, Joe Burrow double stack, but all of those guys dealt with their separate injuries, right? Burrow missed most of the season. Jamar Chase 2 years ago was dealing with injuries. T Higgins has been dealing with injuries the last 2 years. We have yet to see really all 3 of these guys on the field healthy for like 15 plus games combined. And I do think if that happens, we're looking at Joe Burrow with a 40 plus touchdown upside, and not many quarterbacks have that type of ceiling. And to me, Joe Burrow is one of the more affordable 40 plus upside type of quarterbacks you're going to get, because you can draft this guy in round 6, in round 5 at the earliest. Sometimes he falls even into round like 7 plus, especially if you're doing like a Jamar Chase at 105, T Higgins in the 4th, 5th round, and then Joe Burrow in the 6th, 7th round. Like that is a very affordable, like mega onslaught, concentrated offense stack that we know can go nuclear if everything breaks right for them.
I will say about this tier specifically for me. So we mentioned CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson kind of go off the board above these guys. It's kind of like how drafters are trading them on underdog. CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson being top 55, top 60 picks. And then there's a little bit of a chasm once you get down to Burrow, Murray, Prescott, Love in terms of ADP. Burrow heading that group at 75.7, but all of them being within about 15 picks, with Love going off the board as the 90.9 overall player. So it's kind of like, in terms of how drafters are treating it, Stroud and Anthony Richardson are like in their own mini tier above. But like you said, from a projection standpoint, I really view this as a flat tier, and I'm just going based off ADP value. Like the guys that I can get closer to the 80 range, like Kyler, like Dak, like Love, I'm more likely to wait on them from an opportunity cost standpoint rather than taking the earlier projection of that group personally.
Yeah, I view Burrow, Love, and Prescott a little bit too as like the cheaper version of Stroud. Maybe not so much Dak, and we'll talk about him in a second, but like Burrow and Love, big totality, great weapons groups, just like Stroud. Only Stroud, you have to take like 20, 30 picks ahead of where Burrow and Love go, and sometimes even later than that. And then Kyler, I view as like the cheaper version of Richardson, where you're taking them for the rushing upside. Richardson, of course, has this untapped ceiling potential because we don't really know what we're expecting out of him. But I feel very confident that Kyler Murray, when he's on the field and when he's healthy, can run like a maniac. He has Marvin Harrison now to throw the football to. Trey McBride took a big step last year. They're lacking a total weapons group that I would love to see out of this group, but I still feel pretty confident in Kyler Murray. I find myself drafting Burrow, Kyler, and Love the most out of the guys in this tier, just given price. But I love all of them. And with Richardson, I actually really feel good about his weapons group too. I mean, Taylor in the backfield is going to help move the offense. You have Pittman, who obviously was great last year. Josh Downs, who I'm a big truther of. They bring in AD Mitchell. They still have, I mean, Alec Pierce is going to probably just run wind sprints, but
he's a good wide receiver fourth, to be fair. And like, similar to your point, like if hypothetically AD Mitchell got banged up for a couple of games, like Pierce showed spike week potential. Pierce showed he can stretch the field, right?
Yeah, exactly. So again, I feel like pretty good about the ceiling of all of these players. It's just that I'm just taking whoever the cheapest ones are. If I want a rushing quarterback, I'll take Kyler at the discount versus Richardson. If I want a, passing upside quarterback because maybe I have some pass catching weapons stacked up already, I'll take Burrow, I'll take Love, I'll take Stroud, whatever the case is. Now let's get to Dak Prescott. Me and you kind of differ on this one a little bit. Obviously, I mean, you're the Dak Prescott truther, you're a Cowboys fan. The reason I view Dak Prescott a slight tier behind these guys is not because I think Dak is a bad option. I think he definitely has like anywhere like floor, probably like 17, 18, 19 points per game. And then ceiling probably 21, 22, maybe like 23 points per game at the absolute nutted scenario. I just view his receiving core in totality. Lamb is obviously a stud, worse than the rest of the passing quarterbacks. Burrow, Love, Stroud. I think as a total receiving core, I think they have a worse pass catching group. And then also too with Dak, I've mentioned my concerns around the team. I think that the offensive line suffered some major, reshuffling that could affect the offense. Also, the running game's not very good in Dallas right now. That could affect the offense. It's not that I don't like him. I just don't view him as much, significantly better than the guys that are in the next tier down, like the Purdy's and the Herberts and those type of guys.
Yeah, and I'll make the case for that because, like Corey's saying, I think we agree in the sense that if Lamb were to miss some time, the Cowboys' offense would be hurt comparatively more than the other guys in this year. Like, I understand that from a downside risk perspective if you want to have them a little bit after these guys. The reason why I personally have them not only in this tier but in the middle of this tier is that we've seen the elite passing upside for Dak Prescott, a guy that can throw over 4,500 yards, a guy that can throw for over 35 passing touchdowns, a guy that in the second half of last year. So if you guys remember the narrative of last year for the Cowboys, if you drafted Cowboys early in your drafts, the first 6 weeks of the year or so that they couldn't score in the red zone, they couldn't sustain offensive drives, people were questioning Mike McCarthy's system. People really didn't know what was going on with the Cowboys offense. This was an offense that everybody projected to be a top 5 to 10 offense going into last year. And in the first 6 weeks of the year, they're more so like the 18th or 21st best offense in the league. The Chargers game hits, and I really do feel like whether it was a communications issue before that, whether it was just, Dak talking to Mike McCarthy saying, you know what, this is going to work better than what we're doing. I don't know what clicked, but the Cowboys offense clicked to the point where from then on out, they were the best offense in the NFL. Dak regained some of his rushing upside, had a couple games where he scored some rushing touchdowns, where he had a couple yards, like the Chargers game in particular. I think he had a 20-yard rushing touchdown, which that seems insignificant, but for a guy that's coming off of a big lower body injury from a few years ago, seeing that he can at least still move out of the pocket, which we didn't see in the first 6 weeks of the year, I definitely think was critical. We saw Dak playing loose, playing comfortable. CeeDee Lamb obviously erupted, like I mentioned in last video. Dak was the quarterback 2 in fantasy week 7 on last year. He was the only quarterback that was within striking distance of Josh Allen in fantasy. So for me, I'm already kind of baking in the fact that maybe it was a hotter stretch. you have to take the season in totality. But even when you take the season in totality, he was the quarterback 3 in fantasy last year and led the league in passing touchdowns. You can make the case he was the MVP.
Yeah, my argument is not so much against Dak. It's that
Outside
Purdy was
risk.
right behind him in MVP voting, who I can get later.
For sure.
Trevor Lawrence, I really believe in. Justin Herbert's an elite NFL quarterback. Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, you got the rushing upside and the upside of the rookies. Tua Tagovailoa's offense actually passed at a pretty high rate last year, like 58% of the time in neutral scripts they were passing the football. Jared Goff, I'll take Dak way ahead of him. I think that's probably fine. Matthew Stafford's got 2 great receivers, and he's a very good quarterback.
Yeah.
There's more names down at the bottom where I think that I feel comfortable saying that if the top of the tier is Dak Prescott in the minds of the ADP right now, which is kind of how it is, where he's like in the 80s, 90s of overall ADP. And then Matthew Stafford's like the end of that tier where he's in like the 120s or 130s, and I can get him in like the 11th, 12th, 13th round of my draft. We always want to catch the end of the tier break, maybe not starting the tier break. So that's kind of just the way I view Dak Prescott. Like I said, the difference between the top guys for me is that their weapons in totality are better than Dak's. But to your point, the production was very strong.
Yeah, the reason why I kind of believe he's not only a part of this tier, but more so, in my opinion, towards the middle, is that what you argued for, like the Stafford, the Tua, the Lawrence, the Purdy. I mean, I could just argue back that Dak Prescott outproduced every single other quarterback in his current tier that he's in.
Yeah, no, I agree. But in his current tier, CJ Stroud was a rookie. Joe Burrow was injured. Kyler Murray was injured. Anthony Richardson was injured. Jordan Love was a first-year starter. Again, I'm projecting forward. Last year, he absolutely outproduced all those guys. But to me, going forward, I don't view that quite as the same. Let's move into the next tier before we talk about Dak very long. Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Tua Tagovailoa, and Jared Goff. This is like the what are you looking for tier? Because if you want like a solid, you punted quarterback, the rest of your team is really strong. You're in the type of league where you can't really get good quarterbacks off the waiver wire because people are just like dumb and they roster like 2 or 3 quarterbacks, or you're in a best ball draft and you want to stack up teams or whatever. Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, those feel like pretty safe bets to me as like guys that you can probably throw into your starting lineup, get 18 to 20 points per game.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny if you're doing a best ball draft. Let's say you want to do a 2 quarterback build. If you went with Dak Prescott in the round 5 to 7 range, you take like Caleb Williams type as your second quarterback. If you went with like an Anthony Richardson or a Kyler Murray with your first quarterback pick, then maybe you take a Brock Purdy type. Like Corey kind of said, it's like mixing and matching your quarterback core to the point where you get a guy that can break fantasy, but you also get a guy that can be a steady top end mid quarterback 1 projection, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of these guys are going to have more rushing upside than the others and, you know, that kind of thing. I think that maybe Trevor Lawrence is a bit of a surprise for some people to have in this tier because he hasn't really produced very well last year going in to the season. We all expected him. He was like a, quarterback 5, 6, 7 off the board, I think, in fantasy drafts. He was a very high pick and he kind of disappointed relative to expectations. But I will remind you that, you know, prior to his injury, he was producing pretty solidly. Even though he was quarterback 13 in points per game, he still had 4 touchdowns and 339 rushing yards. So he can provide a little bit with his legs. And now they add Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk hopefully can stay healthy. Evan Ingram had a good season last year. The team in totality feels a little bit better for Trevor Lawrence. And hopefully he himself can stay healthy because he suffered an ankle injury and a shoulder injury down the back half of the season. So for me, wherever Herbert is, Lawrence needs to be right there with him. Because the other thing about Jacksonville is of the teams, of the players in this tier, I would bet on Jacksonville being the most pass heavy as well. Whereas like Tua, Jared Goff, 49ers, the Chargers, those type of teams, they might be throwing the ball a lot less. Maybe you could argue the Chicago Bears are up there, and that might be what you're arguing. But Caleb Williams is also a rookie quarterback, so that's kind of me factoring that in.
100%. Again, like Caleb Williams is a rookie, so I understand from a medium projection standpoint, you take the guy, the vet, to be able to throw the ball more. But I mean, Caleb Williams is the guy I have ranked atop of this group. He's currently my quarterback 11, and I understand the risk. You want to say, boo, rookie quarterbacks are never a good bet. You know what I mean? Like they have to be CJ Stroud to pay off. And even CJ Stroud was a mid quarterback 1, even when he was healthy last year. Like he was very, very good, but from a production standpoint, wasn't quite an elite difference-making quarterback. For me, I've never seen a quarterback of the caliber of prospect that Caleb Williams is walking into this type of situation. You can make the case that Trevor Lawrence, when he was a prospect, better prospect than Caleb Williams. You can make the case that Andrew Luck, when he was a prospect, better prospect than Caleb Williams. Neither of them are walking in to 3 stud wide receivers, an improved offensive line, and a much improved coaching staff compared to last year, which, to be fair, the reason why this has happened is that the first overall pick that they got wasn't even their own. They got that from the Panthers. They were more so like the 10th worst team in the league, 9th worst team, I believe. I believe they actually got the 9th overall pick. So they were the 9th worst team in the league. You had Caleb Williams, you had Rome Odunze, you had Keenan Allen. DJ Moore was a near 1,400-yard wide receiver last year. Like, I think the Chicago Bears are going to pull the Houston Texans from last year and make the playoffs in the NFC. I think they're that caliber of team. I think they have that caliber of quarterback. And if that's going to be the case, Caleb Williams, why can't he throw 26 passing touchdowns, contribute 400 to 500 on the ground, give you 3 to 5 rushing touchdowns, and finish as the quarterback 7 in fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to average 8.2 yards per attempt like CJ Stroud did last year, because 100%. That was just like an absurd number.
Bonkers.
But CJ Stroud rushed for 167 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yeah. And Caleb Williams is a much better runner than CJ Stroud. So that's kind of the difference there, where if you get a QB7 finish out of Caleb Williams, that wouldn't shock me. But 18.7 fantasy points per game is definitely something he could put up. He could even be better than that, because, you know, Stroud, it took him a couple weeks to get his legs under him, and he'll probably do the same thing for Caleb Williams. But man, the weapons group is excellent. And we know, unlike Stroud's weapons group, he kind of elevated the play of everybody. If Caleb Williams elevates the play of everybody who are already good players, that would be extremely, extremely like Caleb Williams is this year's, you know, what if he won the MVP as a rookie? Like he's capable of doing that with the weapons group that's around him. And again, if you're an underdog draft and you took like a safe Joe Burrow quarterback in round 6, and you want to wrap around in round 11 or round 10 or wherever Caleb Williams goes and wrap around and take him, then that's a perfect like 1-2 punch at quarterback. You got your safe spike week guy in Joe Burrow. You pair him with a rookie who's got a lot of upside in Caleb Williams. Burrow can get you by early on in the season. Caleb Williams maybe a league winner for you when the weeks matter in the playoff weeks.
So the Cowboys were close a few years ago when they had Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. There have been 5 total seasons in the NFL with a wide receiver trio all eclipsing 1,000 yards. I think we may see it again this year. The last time it's happened, the 2008 Arizona Cardinals, Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, and Steve Breston. I think we're about to see a wide receiver trio each eclipse 1,000 yards again this year.
Yeah, and I think on a pace number perspective, the Buccaneers with Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans were on pace to do it. But because AB missed some games or whatever the case was, it didn't actually end up playing out that way. But regardless, man, like I do think the weapons group is great. We haven't even mentioned like the ancillary weapons are solid. All 3 running backs are capable. You have Cole Kmet, who's a capable tight end in the red zone for Caleb Williams. We could wax poetic about how good this landing spot is, but like it is really, really good. And Shane Waldron may be a concern for some people, but to me, I think he's just going to make, you know how Zach Taylor, we view him a lot differently now that Joe Burrow is there. I think that's how Shane Waldron is going to look, dealing with this cast of weapons, dealing with this rookie quarterback. Speaking on Jaden Daniels too, he might not be the greatest passing quarterback in the world, and I don't think he will look like that in his rookie season. But if he rushes for 900 yards and 9 touchdowns, like he's legitimately going to be a back-end QB1 in fantasy. So you could make the argument that he's even too low in our rankings right now, because we just know how fantasy scoring works, and fantasy scoring rewards rushing quarterbacks. And if this offense is, you know, subpar, or maybe they're like the 22nd best offense in the league, but Jaden Daniels is rushing in all these points, he's going to just look like Anthony Richardson did before he got injured last year.
Yeah, and the issue is that people are going to say, well, quarterback 16, like that's so low. But at the same time for us,
just a lot of good quarterbacks.
Trevor Lawrence, elite talent in our opinion to be able to step back. Justin Herbert, I think Justin Herbert's the 4th best quarterback in the league. Having him outside of the top 10, like I understand the weapons core isn't great, but Vlad McConkey is the wide receiver I think he can be. And
I think it's a volume concern for me about Justin Herbert more so than it would be. I think he's just going to elevate the play of the weapons. I'm really not that concerned about it. I think it's more that they throw the ball 525 times.
No, same. That's the main concern, the weapons core plus the volume. But at the same time, it's like that was the same concerns we kind of had for Patrick Mahomes a couple years ago. And then he just went out and won MVP, and he was the best quarterback in the league anyways. Like, I think Justin Herbert is not Patrick Mahomes, he's one of the few quarterbacks that I would say is in that tier 1 of quarterbacks.
Yeah, I feel like indifferent about Justin Herbert. I get him on my team. Like I feel solid about it, but at the same time, like would it shock me at all if he kind of regressed a little bit without Keenan Allen and without Mike Williams? Like, it wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if this offense is also very game managery and, he's asked to like hand the ball off a lot more. Cause like Herbert has been near the top of the league in pass attempts, near the top of the league in, neutral script pass rate and all that kind of stuff for the last couple of years. And we've seen solid fantasy production out of him, but we've never seen like an MVP caliber season out of the guy.
We saw one, and it was his second year in the league where he literally looked like the reincarnate of Andrew Luck. In his second season
He did, but like since then, he's been quarterback 15 and quarterback 8 the last 2 years,
the issue.
Right? Like, so again, and we're talking with high passing volume. Like, he threw 4,700 passing yards in 2022 and was still only quarterback 15 in points per game with 4,700 passing yards.
Nearly 700 pass attempts. And it's weird because I remember I was making the argument. I was big time in on Herbert last year because I would make the argument that, hey, throughout his NFL career, 595 pass attempts in 15 games as a starting rookie quarterback, 5th overall pick or 6th overall pick, whenever he went. The next year, 672 in 17 games. The next year, 699 in 17 games. So last year going into it, I'm like, you know what? Like, this is an offense that's going to throw the ball at an elite rate. Like, I'm all over Justin Herbert. And we saw their overall volume already regress last year. And now they get Jim Harbaugh. And now they get Greg Roman.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot broke wrong for him. Mike Williams tore his ACL.
Yeah.
QJ was a bust. Keenan Allen was consistent, obviously, but he dealt with some stuff as well. So a lot went wrong for Herbert last year, and maybe he's a bounce back candidate for that reason. He can elevate the play of Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer, QJ, the guys that are there. I like, now that I think about it, I honestly think I would prefer both rookies over Justin Herbert. Like, I think the upside is so tantalizing that I could get them. And knowing that Herbert's a lower passing volume guy, what makes him really all that different from Tua Tagovailoa, who has better weapons? What makes him all that different from Jared Goff, who has better weapons? What makes him all that different from Matthew Stafford, that has better weapons? And I would argue that all 3 of those teams will throw more than the Los Angeles Chargers as well.
I actually have, for reference in this tier order, I have Caleb Williams 11, Brock Purdy 12, Tua 13, Herbert 14, Lawrence 15. But now you make the case, honestly, I'd probably have to lower at least Herbert below Lawrence. 16, Jaden Daniels. And the guy that we haven't touched upon at all in this tier is Jared Goff. And he's just vanilla milkshake. He's going to finish as like a top 12-ish type of quarterback. He's like the new Kirk Cousins in fantasy, where he's going to finish above where he's going, but can he break the fantasy football landscape? No.
Yeah, he's the definition of, in best ball, he's a great quarterback too if you took a risk with your first quarterback. Yeah. And also, if you're playing redraft, it's like draft him in the 12th, 13th round and pair him with Jaden Daniels and see what happens with your quarterback core. You know what I mean? Like, you might actually end up taking your first quarterback before Jared Goff and using Jared Goff maybe to get you by early on in the season until you wait and see what Caleb Williams or what Jaden Daniels, or maybe you take a swing later on like a Drake May or Will Levis or something like that, can bring you. So for me, that's what Jared Goff represents. It's like, you're probably right. Like, he'll probably finish higher than we have him ranked, which is like what, quarterback 16, 17 or whatever. He'll probably be like quarterback 11 points per game.
Yeah. I mean, last year, very, very similar scenario where like people made the same cases with Jared Goff, and he ends up finishing as the quarterback 7. But when you dilute that to points per game, you kind of realize that's more so closer to a back end quarterback 1. So he's a fine option. Like, if you have Jared Goff, especially if you're in a super flex league, in super flex, I'm more than willing to take him higher than he's listed here. But one quarterback specifically, knowing how much upside actually matters to potentially fend off the Hurts, the Allen, the Mahomes, the Jackson, the position, you kind of got to hit on a guy that can at least give you a winning battle against those guys. And for me, Jared Goff, the ceiling just isn't quite there on that level.
Yeah, median projection wise, like, we have Tua and Goff listed towards the end of this tier, but again, it's all about what you're looking for. If I had to say Tua and Jared Goff right now, gun to my head, where are they going to finish? Are they going to beat out Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Justin Herbert? I would say yes, they probably will, in terms of their median projection. But like you said, Tua Tagovailoa's ceiling is probably 18, 19 points per game, given that his offense is a little bit more run heavy. They got 3 capable backs there. Jared Goff, probably 18, 19 points per game is his ceiling as well, whereas Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Jaden Daniels have higher ceilings. And Justin Herbert, again, more that I think about it, I think Herbert actually belongs at the very end of this tier. Not that he's a bad quarterback. It's just, think about it. He has the worst weapons group of anybody in this tier.
I agree, but
he also is going to throw the least of anybody in this tier as well.
It's just, aesthetically, I just don't know if I can.
I know it feels gross putting this good of a quarterback towards the end of the tier, but we're playing fantasy, right? We're not playing real life quarterback. He might be a top 5 quarterback in terms of yards per attempt and those kind of metrics. I just don't think fantasy production wise, he's going to give you the consistency that people are going to want when they take a quarterback. It's like he might have some good spike weeks here and there, but like the weapons group is young. He has a run heavy offense ahead of him. I just don't think that you can take him reasonably over Tua Tagovailoa, who's got two of the best wide receivers in the league.
My worry, though, is that it ends up being a case of Mahomes a couple years ago where we're too
I disagree because Mahomes is better than Justin Herbert.
He is, but Justin Herbert is the fourth best quarterback in the league for me, and Mahomes is the best. Like
I think that's again, I think that's debatable, but also think about the projection of when Mahomes finished that high. He threw the ball a ton, right? Like we don't think that Herbert's going to do that.
No, I agree. Again, like from the numbers, Herbert has to be at the bottom of this tier, but do I have the stomach to take every single one of those guys in this tier over Herbert if I'm on the clock? I don't know.
I think I do. I do. We're playing part of the thing that I've learned about fantasy over the last couple of years is like sometimes you just like it doesn't make real life sense to take Jared Goff over Justin Herbert. But I mean, we're getting the tires pumped majorly for Jameson Williams. If he takes a step forward and St. Brown, Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield and Jameson Williams takes a step, at least as just like maybe a George Pickens caliber wide receiver where he's just like a field stretcher and that kind of thing, man, Jared Goff is going to crush his ADP.
You're probably right, but anytime you go against a guy with the elite talent of Herbert, it is the scariest fucking thing in the world.
Well, I mean, if you went against the elite talent of Herbert the last 2 years, it would have been a smart decision because 100%. He has not paid off his ADP.
100%, but that's kind of what makes me even more worried is that he's had a couple bad years. When are we going to get the Herbert boom year?
Again, like I said, he's had a couple bad years, you're right, but he had a season where he threw the ball almost 700 times and he was outside of the top 12 quarterbacks.
That's crazy. If I remember correctly,
like maybe he's a smidge overrated as a talent is basically what I'm getting at.
I don't know about that.
He had good weapons. He threw the ball almost 700 times and he still couldn't finish top 12. Like that's bad.
If we're going that far, we can just talk about some of these late round quarterbacks. I'd argue that the older injury prone guys, if we're arguing, Goff, Tua, etc., Stafford, Cousins, Rodgers, what's the difference, assuming health, between them and like the Goff archetype?
I don't think there's a big difference at all, which is why, like I said to my Dak Prescott point, and maybe not so, like Dak is obviously at the top of that tier and that kind of thing for me, but if Dak Prescott's median is 18 to 20 points per game and his ceiling is 22 points per game, I can say the same thing probably about Stafford, only his floor is a little bit lower and his ceiling's a little bit lower. Like the situation that we have with these guys is Matthew Stafford. Yeah, I feel if you're doing a late round quarterback approach where you just want, you take Jaden Daniels in round 11, round 12 for your upside, and you want a late round quarterback to start early in the season, you want to take Matthew Stafford round 13, round 14 in your redraft league. To me, that is a very smart strategy because you're going to get high-end passing production out of Matthew Stafford with two stud receivers on the outside, a team that is going to throw the ball at a super high rate this year. So give me Matthew Stafford all day, to be honest. I think he's a great, great option late on in best ball, late on in redraft leagues. Deshaun Watson just obligatory has to be ranked here because he does run. I know he's been so bad, but if you think about what is the archetype of late round quarterback that crushes, it's the guys that run, man. And Deshaun Watson can run. So if he can somehow get anywhere close to his previous Houston Texans self and runs the ball like he did when he was in Houston, he is going to eviscerate his ADP. So in redraft leagues, when there's no real downside risk to taking a 14th round Deshaun Watson, you might as well take the swing on him, to be honest.
100%. And the way I kind of view this here, we're talking about it a little bit off camera, is that you got the old veteran pocket passers that are coming off of injury concerns. With Stafford, obviously last year, I believe it was his upper body, his shoulder, his arm. I don't know exactly what it was, but it happened against the Cowboys. He missed a couple games, ends up finishing the year extremely strong. I'm less worried about his injury than the next two guys because, I mean, we're talking about 36-plus-year-old quarterbacks coming off a shredded Achilles with Kirk Cousins and with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers specifically, we know when he's healthy, he's arguably one of the tier 1, tier 2 quarterbacks in the league, even still projecting coming off of that Achilles. Assuming he's playing a full 17 games, there's no doubt in my mind that Rodgers can get back to that top 8 to 10 level. It's just, does his Achilles permit him to doing so? And with Kirk Cousins, that environment with the Atlanta Falcons, with that weapons group, working in that Zach Robinson offense, a guy that was Jared Goff before Jared Goff. The only problem now is that he's older and coming off of the significant injury. Again, you could make the case that assuming health, these guys should be in the tier above that they are currently.
Yeah, I think that the rationale of this whole story is that like late round quarterback's pretty effective this year. Like you're going to, and that's why I kind of lean into downside risk a little bit is like, if the downside risk is high, you probably shouldn't draft these guys because there is so many available that have safer floors. Like Tua, for example, I think has a pretty safe floor because of the weapons group around him. If they miss Tyreek for 7 games, I don't think they would really be that bad off on offense. I think they would still be pretty good. Same goes with like Jared Goff and stuff. Whereas Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, they're newer environments. I guess Rodgers was there last year for training camp, but he didn't play with the team. Not to mention Kirk Cousins and Rodgers. We think those teams will be relatively pass heavy, but maybe they lean on their run games a little bit more than we're thinking. So that's a risk with those guys as well. But again, are they good late round quarterbacks? If you took a risk on Richardson or Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams and you wanted a safe guy to get you by early in the season for a redraft league, I don't think they're bad options at all. Baker Mayfield's just like cheaper Jared Goff, honestly.
Yeah.
He's going to give you probably like quarterback 14 in points per game production, assuming he plays the whole season. Godwin, Evans, Rashad White out of the backfield. K. Dotton took a step forward last year. It's a pretty solid weapons group. It's just not the type of, dominant offense that people want to buy into necessarily. I think he's a great super flex target. If you're playing super flex redraft or whatever, he's a great quarterback 2 or quarterback 3 to have in super flex because he's going to be really cheap. And I think that he's going to be a pretty consistent producer.
Baker for me is funny because I don't quite view him on the same level of Stafford, Rodgers, Cousins, permitting health, but I also prefer him to the next group of vet guys with like Geno, Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, hypothetically. So I think he has to be more so at the end of this year than the start of next year. But if you were to kind of bridge it off, like I would say after Deshaun Watson, maybe a little mini tier for me. So Stafford, Rodgers, Cousins, Watson. And then you got the upside of Levis and May with the stability of Baker Mayfield. And for the reference, if Drake May is starting in week 1, you can make the case that 23 is also too low for him too.
Yeah, I would say there's no reason to rank him any higher than that because I think this is already above market on Drake May. And I think he will be starting in week 1 because I think they'll be too tantalized with the upside of getting him experience.
Quarterback 28 ADP, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. 28. He's just a good value at this point. It's just really difficult to say that he's going to get out to a great hot start knowing the weapons group that he has is very young, unproven, that kind of thing. But he can run too, right? It wouldn't shock me if Drake May ran for 500 yards and 6 touchdowns and was this year's CJ Stroud from just came way out of the woodworks, like QB 25 plus an ADP and ended up finishing top 12. Drake May has that upside, which is why, like I said, if you take Tua Tagovailoa, it doesn't hurt you to just hold Drake May on your roster for 1 or 2 weeks at the beginning of the season.
Especially in deeper benches.
Deeper benches. Like I'm in a lot of leagues where people roster 2 quarterbacks. And if you drafted a safe quarterback like Tua or Jared Goff or something like that, and you wanted a ceiling play just to hold for 2-3 weeks, and then you drop him, no harm, no foul after that, Drake May and Will Levis too both fit that description because Will Levis is in a situation with Bill Callahan and Brian Callahan coming in where they might throw the ball a little bit more than we're expecting as well. And he has okay weapons, solid weapons. I feel pretty optimistic about a lot of quarterbacks this year. Inevitably, some of them are not going to work out. That's just the nature of the position. Some guys are going to get injured. Some guys' weapons are going to get injured. Teams are going to disappoint. Teams are going to surprise. It's just that I think there's a lot more upside later on in redraft and best ball than there usually is. Normally last year, it was like QB 20, 22, 23 was like, we're talking guys that we know exactly what they are. We're talking guys that don't really have super high ceilings. Whereas this year, you got a mix of very solid projections like a Cousins or Rodgers, somebody like that, Baker Mayfield, or guys that have really tantalizing upside. So moral of the story is quarterback is quite deep this year, at least the way that I look at it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, we were the guys, waxing poetic about how much an elite quarterback was an advantage last year, but it really feels like the board has kind of all shifted down to the point where I like the value pockets at every single tier this year. It's not like I'm pressed about missing out on a tier of quarterbacks. It's more so just when I'm on the clock, how do those quarterbacks compare to the wide receivers, running backs, tight ends relative to them? And does it make sense in taking that quarterback name over those relative other positions?
Yeah, and especially on underdog, it's like you don't want to miss the wide receiver avalanche. So for me, it's like I'm actually a little bit more likely to fade these top 8 to 10 guys a little bit if they're not falling at a good value and I don't have stacking partners and that kind of thing. Yeah. Because I don't want to be like drafting Jameson Williams as my wide receiver 3 or whatever on underdog. And I can stomach
the breakout report, bro.
Baker Mayfield, Drake May quarterback room because I faded quarterback. I can't stomach like having no good wide receivers.
Wait, you're saying Jameson Williams isn't a guaranteed breakout because there's a report about how much better he's gotten this offseason? Like, it's
No,
insane.
I am definitely saying that he has a chance to break out, but yeah, the quarterback position is interesting this year for sure.
Yeah, 100%. No, it's just funny how those reports come out every year. And then when you talk bad about that player, you just get people sending you those reports. It's like, okay, like we see this every single year. And how many of these offseason reports actually end up in a breakout?
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little better about Jameson Williams than I did a
Sure.
calendar year
Yeah.
ago, but I also don't think he's a guaranteed smash either. Anyways, this is not the Jameson Williams video. This is the end of the video, though. We broke down our top 24 quarterbacks in depth, how the quarterback landscape looks. If you guys are doing best ball drafts right now, head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code FSE for $250 in bonus bets, a free pick'em special right now that you can use. When you use promo code FSE, you get our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide for free. You also will get our redraft guide, redraft rankings manifesto for free once it comes out. It'll probably be in July when I come back from Europe that we actually have that out, but you will get it for free by using our Underdog promo code FSE, like I said, and making a $10 deposit. Also, make sure to check out Flock Fantasy for all of our Dynasty content and all of our rookie content, all of our trade calculators, Dynasty trade value charts, and all that good stuff. Both things will be linked down below in the description. We will have tight ends for you coming up the next day or the day after that, something like that. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.